childhood up, we have had to conform to a certain social game. And so we're in a constant state of competition. Good assistance, secret. You can't make a mistake.
Welcome, everyone, to Friends of Failure. I'm your host, Sam, and this is my co-host, Megan.
Heyo.
Today, we have a very special guest. I'd like to introduce everyone to Mitchell Smolkin. How you doing?
I'm doing really good. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, we're glad to have you. Thanks for joining us. I know right now it's a little later for you than it is for us. We're early afternoon, and you're definitely in the evening time at this point, right?
I'm well into the evening, especially as it gets into the fall here. It gets dark quite early in the northern hemisphere.
Yeah. We kind of play that game a little bit, but not too much.
Yeah.
We're super glad to have you. I would like to take a moment, and if you would like, just kind of tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us, kind of what you do, what you're about.
Cool. Well, I think that my friends would often joke that I've retired like 4 times in my life. So, and I'm not that old. But I guess my one of the main things I do is I work as a psychotherapist internationally with lots of folks. I'm based in Stockholm. I write in the area of psychology. I have my own podcast called The Dignity of Suffering, which I think will align very nicely with, it sounds like, what you've put out there. And I've also been a professional singer and actor for going on, I don't know, maybe 30 years. And so I've crisscrossed the States and Canada and other parts of the world singing and acting. And I have a whole bunch of artists actually coming to Stockholm next week from Buenos Aires and Canada and Switzerland to kind of delve into actually something that has a lot to do with failure. So like directly to do with failure, which maybe we'll get into, some archival material about some ancestry of mine where there was a big failure and how that shaped things to come. And so I kind of straddle being a professional in the field, looking at trauma and the neurophysiology of emotion, and also looking at it from a literary kind of artistic philosophical angle is kind of my jam.
So you're a Renaissance man, a true Renaissance man.
Hey, ask me anything.
I love the way you started that with my friends would say that I've retired like 4 times now, and I'm like, man, there are people that don't even retire once, and like, he picks it up and he's like, we're done here, moves on to the next one. That's great. What kind of like, whenever you've done acting, did you have like a preference? I'm just curious. Like action movies, I'm assuming you were in like the Transformer movies or the
Yeah, I played a Transformer in number 2 for is there a 7? I can't remember.
It probably
there's
is.
like 12 of them. Yeah, there's like 12.
My love is musical theater. My love is like old school golden age of American songbook, just big voice, Sinatra, fly me to the moon. Let me play among the stars. Let me see what spring is like on Jupiter and Mars. Just, the old meaty stuff. So my favorite role was Billy Bigelow in Carousel, which I just adored, because he has that big, if I loved you time and again, just that like, you can kind of die in the middle of the song. That's what I love.
We can just have you sing the whole time. It'd be very sick.
Welcome to our singing episode. No, I mean you have a phenomenal voice.
Thank you.
So it's so strange, because one thing I love about your intro is the fact that they don't like the things don't seem like they would go together, right? Like you're a psychotherapist, but then at the same time it's like you're in theater, right? And I guess you have to be able to really work with the mind to do both of those, right? But so you had mentioned you have a bunch of people coming together from the hemisphere of like doing music, right? And it directly correlated with failure. I was just kind of curious if you could go deeper with that. You've got some like
Yeah,
hidden tablets of like information that we need to know.
I've never combined my professions in the way that someone might be like a, you know, an art therapist or a drama therapist, or, you know, use that kind of convention. Although I have a lot of respect, it makes sense to me. The most I've done is that when I do a lot of couples work, and when people are very distressed and emotional, they can't really hear. And so if I have to come in to soothe someone so they can just regulate themselves, I might sing their name, be like, Megan. You know, if they're just really like overwhelmed and they can't hear me in a clinical setting, I'll find myself just doing something to kind of just reach to them, right? Because it's when we're scared, you know. But actually, if you think about the function of art, even going back to like, you know, the Greeks, right, where it was a civic duty to go watch a play in an amphitheater before any kind of other mediating material in our world, right? There was no psychotherapist, there was no you know, you didn't go to the cinema, you went to go through this kind of like, go back to Aristotle, right? You went back to go through the pathos, to ride this emotional wave as a way of surviving failure, right? To watch death, destruction, and then, you know, if it was possible, a kind of reunification, to see it played out as a means of, I think, mirroring consciousness, right? So I think in a way, there really is there's no separation between a heartfelt cry that you might have. You know, my son was watching something the other night and he's like, I was crying, you know, that is therapeutic because it's mirroring. If you watch the brain, I think there's a man named Daniel Levison in Montreal who studied what happens to the brain when you listen to music, which is why they say to babies, play lots of music and stuff, because it's so integrative, right? It targets all these different facets. The reference to failure in a nutshell is that my grandfather in the Second World War survived by being conscripted into the Red Army, and they were in Belarus in a town called Molodechno, and he was conscripted into the army in, I think, 1940 or 41. In the same town, and they moved east, and the Nazis came and murdered everybody else. So his sisters, his brothers, his parents, everybody was gone. And then after the Holocaust, he studied and became a dentist in Leningrad, which is now St. Petersburg. And I found his diploma from then, and he graduated magna cum laude. So he graduated at the top of his class, and had my mother, and they lived in Poland, and he had a very successful dentistry practice. And in the 1960s, all of the Jews, basically by the end of the 60s, were basically expelled from Poland. So by 68, they were gone all over the world, right? That's why they're everywhere, right? What happened was that he worked the night shift in Canada as an orderly at a hospital and had to go back to the University of Toronto during the day to train as a train as a dentist. He failed an exam and he had a psychotic break and ended up in the hospital. And I found all the letters from the school, from the doctors, from the hospital, but more importantly, at least 30 letters of them begging to give him another chance, begging the Minister of Education, all the way to the Deputy Prime Minister, pleading with them to give him another chance. And I've been reading them the last few days, and they're just like, I'm in tears because the language is so sterile in many ways. It's like, I'm sorry, Boris Gelgor, my grandfather's name, didn't pass this exam. Here's the address where you can write to if he wants to try again. We wish him all the best, or, you know, but meanwhile, this man has lost like his entire meaning in his life, you know, and picked himself back up, became a denturist. And anyway, I also have the letters from 1941 that his mother was writing to him while he was in the Red Army in Yiddish months before she was killed. I have them, like, my wife's translating them this week. And we're going to create a piece of work involving circus, music, and drama based on how do we survive the loss of our identity and our meaning, which I think is it's always prescient. I mean, that's always going on in the world, but the refugee crisis right now is at a certain stage that is very difficult. And so I think it's important to talk about how people survive the loss of who they are. So that's what we're doing.
That is incredible.
Yeah.
To be able to hold something in your hands like that, especially how closely connected you are to it, right? Um, that's just that's just wild. I'm trying to comprehend that. Like if I was handed letters of like, hey, this was my, my great great grandmother and my, grandfather, like, it doesn't matter who the relation is, I would just be baffled by holding that history. Um, the closest thing I can say is whenever I was in school and I was in, I guess it was like middle school, and we read the Diary of Anne Frank, like that moved me because I mean, I felt like I was reading history from a perspective of a person that was like in it, and that's exactly what that is. And
Yeah,
I
and
think
I'm
it's
no good
wonderful.
at like I'm sorry to interrupt you, but like
You're okay.
I'm my wife is a historian actually of the Holocaust. And so I had a meeting today for the project, and I'm holding this letter from 1941, and I'm, and she comes in and she's like, "What are you doing?" She's like, put it, fold it. She's like, "You would never last like a day in the archive." And I'm like,
Oh no.
I'm like eating a sandwich, like it means the world to me, but like I need her to remind me, like, Mitch, like this is intense. So yes, I agree with you. It's
Yeah,
it's
it's
Yeah.
it's like,
valuable. There's
There's
huge value
meaning,
to it.
a ton of
Yeah.
meaning. And I think it's beautiful that you're choosing to share it in this way. And it's kind of how we feel about our topic and our podcast is the more stories we can get out like this, especially when it's very personal, it helps other people that are in different yet similar situations. Because I've heard something, not necessarily to the depth that what your grandfather went through, but a lot of immigrants, when they move to a new place, they could have been a doctor previously and then it's ripped from them and they have to start from the very bottom again and either try to work their way back up into it or kind of just settle for a different life and question themselves on that when it's not. It's hard because it originally was not their failure, and then they can be brought into this immense feeling of failure for
I
trying to
yeah,
get back into it. Yeah.
yeah, I literally met someone, this was like 5 years ago, maybe a little less, maybe a little more, but they basically were a doctor in the Middle East. They came to America and it was like, no, you're not a doctor anymore. And they were like, okay, well, what do I got to do to, continue pursuing that? And they're like, oh, well, you're going to have to go and, do college, and you're going to have to do it for like, 500 years, no big deal, crippling debt. And then, yeah. And then you can just continue what you were doing before. And they're like,
Yeah.
no, I'm not going to do that. And they're like, well, then you're not a doctor. And
Yeah.
I remember I was just like I'm in my mid-20s, just kind of like, yeah, whatever. I'm just kind of floating through life, and I'm hearing this story going, holy moly, like, how does that affect a person's mind and spirit, right? No, like, I've literally saved lives. Yeah, we don't care. You don't have these credentials, right? So you're not wrong. Like, sometimes I guess failure isn't something that it's given to you, right? Like, hey, here you go, you can have this. And I do want to say I love your point of like watching movies and feeling an emotion and being able to express it, right? What was the joke of like, you're in a breakup and I'm going to turn on a movie that makes me cry and eat a whole thing of ice cream, right? It seems really silly, but it's a great way to force yourself to just start pushing out things that you're feeling, because we live in a very, not everywhere, but it's very restrictive, right? You
Yeah.
start bawling your eyes out at Target, people are just like, oh, avoid that. And like, nobody wants to acknowledge or be around intense expression of emotion, unless it's a movie or in theater and whatnot.
well, and to take it a step further, there's always the issue of how we confront our own despair and the movements in our own life, and maybe these stories of people that have to give up so much, we look at them from a distance and we're like, how does someone do that? And yet I think in each of our own lives, we go through the dissolution of our personalities many times, leaving home, getting into a relationship, changing jobs, confronting death, getting older, our bodies changing. I'm not a woman, so I say this with a huge caveat, but I'm married and seen my wife go through this, and I have lots of patience. I've heard women talk about giving birth where they don't like certain foods anymore, like their bodies change, or their humor changes, and it's like, how do we survive? So I think it's important, and I love the name of your, I love the name of your podcast, and because I think that we live in in certain cultures. We have to be careful that we don't talk about all cultures, but there are certain countries and societies where the message has changed, right? The message has changed to, thou shalt not fail, or thou shalt not, thou shalt not be frustrated, or thou shalt not have anxiety, right? So to your point, it becomes very, you become like kryptonite if all of a sudden you're showing this level of despair. And of course, we don't have to look very hard in the last little while to see what happens when despair and disappointment can't be mediated in some kind of thoughtful way, right? It leads to fascism and group psychology and people killing each other out of a kind of manic defense against loss and the dehumanization of the other, And so I think it's all of us, right? It's in our own dreams and our own nightmares, there's something being asked of each of us that has to confront how we die many times in our own life. But you're absolutely right. I mean, for me to contemplate when there was the Indonesian tsunami, and I was looking at the newspaper, and there was this man like in tears holding the body of his wife, and his whole family was gone. I went, holy crap, this is my grandfather, having to survive, and he couldn't talk about it. So this, and I respect that, right? This is not some wild goose chase to be able to talk about despair. It's to be able, I think, as you're pointing out, to acknowledge its presence. Every day, every moment has the potential to fail. It also has the potential to succeed. We have to just be prepared for both.
Yeah.
Right. So a friend of mine had brought up this thing called it was called the 75 hard challenge. There was parameters that you had to accomplish every day. It was like a checklist. And I'm talking to my brother about it. This was 77 days ago.
75 hard, you said? 75
hard. Yeah, it's just 75 days.
Okay.
And so the reason I bring that up is what was weird is, him and I looked at it as like, this is a kind of nutritional, physical challenge. But as soon as you start it, you realize it's a mental game. It's a practice of discipline, right? There are things that are going to be uncomfortable that you have to force yourself to do, or you have to start all over. And what was funny to me is I just kind of like willy-nilly went into it. I think we both did. We were just like, hey, this is the checklist, do it every single day. It can't be that hard. And the weirdest things would come up, right? And something that it did do is it made me walk through like a door, right, of myself. And that was probably the biggest thing that was important to me, is that, you think you have things figured out, but there's always room for growth, right? And the only way to really grow is through failure, right? Because you have to go try things that you're uncomfortable with. You have to go try things that maybe you don't have all the confidence in. You're going to stumble and you might even fall, but then get back up. And there's a huge difference between a group of people came and like murdered everyone in my life, and now I have to either keep going or give up, right? Versus like, oh, I'm going to make my life a little bit harder and make myself uncomfortable, right? I chose to do that versus the reacting to the circumstance. And it was just strange to me because, we see people going through adverse situations on a daily basis, right? The homeless person on the street who's like, man, I don't know what I'm going to eat today. I don't know where I'm going to sleep. And like, I think most of us have that feeling of, if I could, I would, right? If I could just cure homelessness, boom, I'd do it. Or cure disease, boom, I would do it. But as individuals, I don't think we can, right? Like we can only better ourselves. And that's what was kind of ultimately that came out. Like, we literally finished yesterday, by the way. So that was nice, right? Like, we finished it, but like you do it for 75 days. So you create these habits and you keep moving. But that was one of the things that I hope I stay focused on for a while, is that being able to look at someone who's struggling with something and go like, that's what they're doing. They're going through their process of trying to figure it out. They're going to fail here and there, but then eventually, just like you said, you've got to be prepared to succeed too, right? If you only look for the failure, you're only going to find the failure.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
I'm kind of rambling at this point because I'm just like, you know, my brain's racing of all these different things, you know?
It's good points. And the good and the bad we talk about a lot on this podcast, that you can't just have success or good or happiness. There's both on the plane that we exist in. And I kind of wanted to go back to what you said, Mitchell, about how we die multiple times in our life. And there is kind of a mourning process because I've personally been through it where something traumatic has happened and then I'm changed forever. I'm a different person after that. And you kind of mourn for who you used to be before, whether it was the innocence or, you know, not having that weight. And then eventually, after many failed attempts, you start to accept it or at least be okay with its existence. And I like how you say it's not always, hey, I can get up on a stage and tell my story. Because at one point I thought that's what I need to do. I need to like scream my story from the rooftop, but it's okay to just sit back and acknowledge it and be okay with this sucked. It was terrible. It was not a good time. And I'm different now, but that's not a bad thing. And I'm sure your grandpa at some point had to deal with that and be like, hey, it's not how it was. That was really hard to go through. But he eventually, like you said, he kind of got back on his feet and he was able to start moving on, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. I in one of my early podcasts, I interviewed a scholar of Buddhism, and I asked him where the idea of karma came from, right? Because, you know, most religious ideas or philosophies, you know, there has to be a reason for it. Why would a group of people think about an idea that we are, you know, perpetually reborn and we come back? What does that serve, right? And I thought what he said was very interesting. He said that it was one of their ways of dealing with injustice in the world. You know, that there was this recent case, I think, in France. It was all over the news where there was this cold case, 35 years old, and they just discovered who murdered this woman, and he was a gendarme, so he was and he killed himself because they called him in for a DNA test and he couldn't withstand. I guess he knew what was coming. And so they said that, look, there's times where justice is not served in the world, but karma kind of responded to this because it was like, well, this will work itself out ad infinitum. This will keep going until it's like alchemy, right? It'll eventually, you know, change in a way that works this out, the toxicity of it. And, you know, and I wonder in some ways when you sort of talked about my grandfather and how he coped with it, like, it was a very different generation. I don't know, obviously, and you're right. Like the fact that he left a family behind. I remember his funeral, like he died well into his 80s. You know, this was a miracle, right? This was to be celebrated, that this man now has offspring and ancestry. And but I wonder in some ways if it works through our own, you know, because we talk a lot about intergenerational trauma, about the ways that families try to cope with failure and the ways that goes wrong, and how subsequent generations are kind of left, you know, trying to sort out what couldn't have been said or thought or spoken, or, you know, and I was thinking earlier, Sam, that you were, you were talking about sort of looking at somebody else, like someone who's homeless, or, you know, and it's very affecting. It's like, God, like, you know, it seems so other than us, right? It's so, or refugees that are leaving, and you're right. Like on the surface, it's like, you know, I have everything in my life, but I can't put it into words. I wonder if there's something where we have to pull that back and almost, you know, I don't know, maybe that homeless person's less stressed out than I am.
Right.
Maybe they've got it right. You know, maybe I'm like there's something in my own life that I haven't somehow metabolized or thought, like, and but I agree with you 100%. There's a way that you look at other stories and one is very grateful, And I think it's tricky to talk about for obvious reasons, to sort of compare people's suffering versus other people's suffering. But intuitively, I feel like if we can focus on ourselves, if we can kind of be open enough to recognize that we're going through it in whatever way it happens in our life, we might react to it a bit differently rather than blaming others or feeling a sense of injustice. If somehow we can kind of reflect on that it happens to each of us in our own way.
1,000%. Yeah. And so I agree. Like I agree a lot with that. At one point, I briefly lived in Hawaii, and there, homelessness it's not just one place, right? It's everywhere. And you would be out in the city or at the beach, and like you would start talking to strangers. Everyone's friendly. A lot of people are on vacation. And I talked to this guy who was like, I live on the beach. There's nothing against it. I'm able to pop up a tent and I live here. And he's like, one day I was just done. I don't remember what he said he used to do, but he was like, I'm done. And so he has a pickup truck. He had a dog. He had a tent. He was able to like make some money doing odd jobs, but he was like, learn how to fish. Like, I'll be fine. And there was that thought of, wow, like the job at the time I had, super stressful. And he was like, dude, I watch the sunset every day. Like, he's like, I'm living a dream, right? I'm in Hawaii, I'm watching. But like for me, I'm like, I don't like sand. I would hate that. And like, so, that was his version of, he found his version of peace, I guess. And then at the same time, you would run into some homeless people, try to have a conversation. And, whether it was like excessive drug use or alcoholism or whatever, they were fighting more of like the mental health battle, right? And they ended up there just because they lost their path and whatever. But I do agree that a lot of us are opening our minds and our souls, if you want to call them that, to a reality of generational trauma is something that it could have been 250 years ago. Like I don't know. I've never gone and looked all the way down the family tree, right? I don't know 100% where I come from. And I don't know if it will ever matter to me to know for a fact of, this is where it all started and this is how your family got here and so forth. But I do think it's really important that whether I create a family, right, have my own kids or whatever, I need to change the cycle, because I became aware of it and I became aware of the power of work, like working on it, right? And I'm sure, I mean, I'm talking to a psychotherapist. I'm sure like you get it, right? It's not something that's going to happen overnight. And I mean, I even struggle with, I grew up going, you get a job, you work really hard, they'll take care of you in the end and you'll retire. I kept doing this over and over and over and over again, like a madman, thinking at some point it's not them, it's me. It's not them, it's me. I'm going to find the fit, and then I'm going to find the one where I spend 25 years of my life doing it. Who cares if I'm miserable? I'm going to retire. And then one day I had to stop ignoring the truth I already knew, and it was like, hey, dude, it's not out there. Like you have to create your path. And it's horrifying. Like I don't, I mean,
Positive note, I think.
yeah, but I mean, the amount of growth once I accepted it has been phenomenal. I mean, one day Megan comes up to me and she's like, hey, podcast. And I'm like, let's think about it. And then one day I was like, what am I thinking about? Right? Like, if we want to do this, then let's do it. Let's make the time to do it. Let's find the people that want to do it with us, like yourself, It's just
it's
a lot.
Great, it made me think that the thrust of history is an exercise in failure. That you look at any religion or any corporation or any philosophical idea or science and it's all about failure, right? Why are there 10,000 branches of Christianity? Well, because somewhere along the way there was some kind of crisis and somebody went out on their own and thought that they could somehow do it better. Or whatever, right? You look at any sports, I was a baseball fan when I was younger, and we're in this pretty intense wild card race right now. And And I look at the Jays, and it's a team that, you know, I don't recognize because it's constantly failed over and over again to produce something else. And or gender, right? Gender identity or gender roles, right? That I love that quote, right? That it's no good sign of good mental health to be well adapted to a sick society. So people are constantly pushing up against social norms where you know, our generation to an extent, right, was on the cusp of that, you know, have a career, which worked, right? But you know, that's been
Yeah.
blown up. That's been blown up, at least here, right? In various parts of the world, where other places are still very conservative, and it's anxiety provoking, right? It's
It's a
you
huge
know,
change. Yeah.
and it, you know, but it's constant, right?
Mhm.
It is the constant, right? We're not special. We're not special. We're not, you know, we're not special in any way that
We're
that
not.
we and see.
Yeah.
Then Sam
No,
just starts
no.
crying.
Yeah. No, but I like where you're going. Yeah, we're not like
Well, I think it's
we're
helpful because if a couple comes to me like they did this afternoon, and like I can't believe what happened to us. Think about how lonely that is,
Yeah, it's isolating.
right?
We tend to isolate ourselves and think this has never happened to anyone else. But in reality, people have been doing this over and over for thousands of years.
Yeah, and that's what I wanted to say earlier too. Is I think that it is new every time. I don't know, at least in my own life. I probably told this story a million times to friends, maybe on the podcast, but when we emigrated overseas and I eventually sold my house of 16 years in Canada, I always tell this story. I was walking around talking to myself on the street. I slept on my neighbor's couch because I couldn't walk in that place. I was like, what am I doing? Am I insane? How, like, what, like I broke into a million pieces. And I've been, like I said, I've retired 4 times, Sam. No, it was like, it was brand new. It was like, this is, and as I'm going through it, I'm laughing a little bit. I'm actually laughing. I'm like, of course, this feels like even bigger than the last time. Like, this is how it goes. It's just even bigger, you know, until the big one, right? I guess. Who knows
Yeah.
what's after that? But like, it's this, you know, it's an exercise in just growing. So I don't know what it is. It's to withstand.
The human condition, in a way. You just keep going through things that have happened throughout history, but it's a different version. It's always going to be slightly tweaked. And you have no choice, like most things in life, to experience it on your own. And I think that's why people have issues with intimacy or sharing about that stuff. Does that kind of seem to be what you see?
Yeah, there's a really beautiful, you know, Freud's basic thing was how do we live with anxiety, and that not how do we get rid of it, and that is tricky, and probably has been going on forever. That we try to medicate, and we're all doing it in certain ways, right? We all have our vices and ways that we get away from ourselves, but the current stage that we're in is that having anxiety is bad. And this is not meant to belittle anybody who's listening to this, or you both, or me, or anyone else that finds ourselves at times where it is overwhelming and maybe you need help, whether it's medication or otherwise, right? Whatever we can get in life to survive it and make it through.
Mm.
But we have to convey that, and this is why I love thinking back to things like the civic duty to go watch, you know, a tragedy, you know, or the ways that children used to read fairy tales that weren't Disneyfied, right? These were hardcore. The original fairy tales were like gory and involved death.
Yeah.
And it's a bit like, let us introduce you to what this is about, so that when it happens later in your life and you feel this searing pain, you don't immediately jump to I have failed or what's wrong with me, because that's a
Right.
slippery slope. And that,
Mhm.
I think it's fair to say that if we get caught in trying to, and I say this with my own fear, I don't know what I don't know about myself and all the ways I'm pushing things away. I you know, only know what I'm saying. So I get scared sometimes, even with the podcast or what I write. I'm like, don't get, you know, don't get too, what's the word? Like, you know, be really cautious when you talk about other people or what works or what doesn't work, because we are unconscious and we don't know. what we need. So that's a very tricky line for me around the ability to live with anxiety and survive it.
Something that's strange about it, right? And maybe you've seen this before, is that, okay, so you go down the rabbit hole, like, okay, I'm not special. There are plenty of people that have dealt with it, but you have to find what works for you. And depending on like what your beliefs are, right? There are people that think that the energy that they have obtained in this like mech suit has been used before, and it's my job to learn the next lessons, right? So I'm just going to speak as if that's the situation. So one day
mech
someone
suit?
said
What's
to me,
that? What's a mech suit? Sorry.
like the human body. It's
That's a
it's
new one
little,
for me.
yeah,
Okay.
it's a little mech suit. That's all it is,
Got it.
right?
Okay. Got
It's
it.
it's yours temporarily. You die, it decomposes, and then a new one gets made, maybe for someone else. But like energy, let's just say it's constantly reoccurring, right? So like this is my time to use it, and then it gets passed on to whoever else. Someone or a book or whatever put it into my brain of the lessons that you're supposed to learn are going to keep getting presented to you by the universe, God, whatever you want to call it, until you figure it out. And I was like, oh, okay. And then like I thought about it, and I thought about it some more. And then I started to like think I was getting a grasp of what was said to me. And then I kind of like freaked out. Like there was a lot of anxiety to that of, whoa. Because as soon as you start to like see it, you have to dig deeper. You have to, is that true? Is it not true? Have I been doing it wrong? Whatever. And so then I realized that, oh my God, this is the lesson that I've been trying to learn for a decade of my life. And I wasn't aware that I was trying to learn this lesson. I wasn't paying attention to it. I was just letting it happen to me. And I spent a long time trying to find the answers through other people. Because I was like, hey, like you're older than me, or like you do this, or like for some reason everyone else had the answers except for me. And then so on top of the same lesson's going to get presented to you until you figure it out. The next thing was all the answers you've ever needed were within yourself. So now, my mind is blown. And I'm reevaluating everything that is my existence, because I'm like, I've been doing it wrong this whole time. Like, who am I? It's the whole, existential crisis is happening. And I'm like, I'm way too young for this. But then you go, are you?
No.
Is this the way it's supposed to happen?
I think it's good because I've gone through a few existential crises, like a quarter life crisis is what my friends would call it. I think it's good if you've gotten to that point earlier than the norm of like a midlife crisis, because it means you're thinking about it sooner.
Right.
You've actually gone to that point where you want to look inward and go, what am I doing? I know what I'm like actually doing, like physically, but why am I doing this? Should I be doing this? Is it wrong? Is it right? I think it's a good thing, even though it feels like some kind of failure of like, oh,
Exactly.
I can't comprehend this. What am I doing wrong? Which honestly, most people can't comprehend it. Life is a lot.
Or even the fact of like, okay, I was asking questions, but I was asking questions trying to get people to solve my problems.
Yeah.
Then it's, hey, bro, like you have all the answers you've ever needed. And so, you say that to someone who is defensive, I guess I'll use that term, and they'll be like, oh, okay, so you don't need libraries, you don't need to go to Google. That's not like, if I was like, how old is Bruce Springsteen? I'm not just going to look into my brain and go, oh, I have it in there. Like, that's not what that means. It just means like, you have the capacity to do your own research, figure out the way that you need to do it, right? Like, you're still learning from other people and other experiences, right? But it is mind-boggling, because I guess I'm going to kind of go back to the like dying multiple deaths. Like, I think there are a lot of people that say like, I can't do this for whatever reason in so many different regards, just because it's subconsciously for sure, but even consciously going, I don't get to go back from that. Like, once I walk through that door, it's going to close, and I have grown as a person. You don't get to go back to not being aware of like, I am here to learn lessons and I am here to grow as a human being. I used to be the guy that was like, gotta have my weekends. And every single day is a gift. Who cares if it's a Saturday or a Sunday? Who cares what Monday through Sunday is, like, other than making sure you're on time or functioning in some kind of organization. But in terms of being alive, I think it's as simple as choosing to go, hey, I'm glad I'm still here. I'm still have anxiety. I still feel, depression, or, these bad things happen and they're creating negative emotions. I don't ignore that, but it's still like, hey, it's a blessing to be able to feel that emotion, right? Like, even grieving the loss of somebody is still an incredible experience that, sure, you do not want that happening, but it's like, there are people that are 40 years old and they never experienced that emotion.
And you gave up your Sunday to do this podcast, so it's true. It's all fair game.
Mhm.
It's all fair game.
We
I'll do a
should
podcast at midnight. We'll do it right now.
We should
We'll
do the
it right
4
now.
in the morning.
That would be the challenge.
A lot of thoughts came to mind as you both were speaking, and I liked what you said, Sam, that on the other side of the coin, we are absolutely special, right? So I think from the point of view of kind of forgetting, which is why rituals and stories and literature and good symbolization by parents, right? Parents that can receive aggression and understand certain life cycle moments and really show that to the child. That, I think, helps initiate us into not being manically defended against grief and loss in our life, which is a problem. But from the other side of it, we're absolutely special. I was thinking that, each of us right now, looking at each other, we are the world. We are the world. Sorry, I couldn't help it. This was Plato, right? This was consciousness is only because the three of us are sitting here right now through some combination of atoms that creates some. People don't know what consciousness is. That's one of the unsolved riddles in academia and philosophy. But we are somehow able to experience this as something coherent. And there is no other world. There is no, whatever other people are doing right now, forget FOMO. There's no other world. You go to bed at night, you wake up in the middle of the night and you can't sleep and you have insomnia and you're direct, this is the world exists only in that moment. That is the only world that exists. And so in that sense, I agree that we have to go as deep into that specificity and subjectivity as we possibly can to make as much room for that suffering and that just being able to survive the onslaught of what it means to make a world. And that is, in a sense, as you're pointing out, special, or I guess even to say subjective, in the sense that it is other than anybody else. And I think that I wonder if however we get there and however it appears for anybody, it's right. Like, let's say someone doesn't get to their emotions until they're 50 for whatever reason, or maybe never. The story of my grandfather, to be honest with you, was me being a cocky 17 or 18-year-old, realizing what had happened, realizing everyone had been murdered. No one had really ever talked about it in such a clear way, wanting to find out how he had survived it and where he went. Sitting down with him with a map, thinking in my head, you can't fucking talk about this. I'm gonna get you to talk about, you're gonna be a man, right? You haven't shown me this emotion. He was taking Valium for years to deal with the pain. So I sat down with him at his kitchen table with a map and I said, tell me, I want to know the names of your siblings. And you know what happened next? We both almost completely fainted. I started losing my vision. I couldn't see anymore. I saw he was falling back. I felt like a string broke. And then I was sitting in my chair and he was slumped over. And you know what I said to myself? I said, you're not a man? Fuck you. You're like, how did you even make it? You don't want to talk about this? You don't want to cry? You don't want to tell me their names? It totally changed. Like if someone can't talk about something, don't talk about it.
Right.
There's no failure there.
Yeah.
The dude survived without I don't know, talking to pigeons for the next 40 years. Like, there's no failure. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, I think we think to ourselves, like you're saying, we hit 25, 30, 35, 40, and all of a sudden, I love what you said. It's like we have to go into ourselves. But I don't think that that's a failure of somehow we used to, this sort of contemporary language around like, oh, I take the other people's opinions to heart, or of course we're going to do that.
Mm-hmm.
That's the first part of life is mom, dad, what do you think of me? And to a greater or lesser extent, I realize, of course, some people don't have any core themselves, right? But that idea of like going in, like you had a great American psychologist, James Hillman, who wrote a book called The Force of Character. And he talked about how as the life goes on, we have to go into ourselves. We can't, but I'm with you. It's, that's a tough process, but I think the wrestling with it and I used to do this all wrong, or I cared about other people. I think that's just all part of it. Like it's, but when I went through it too, it's not like I'm sitting there going, yeah, this is just part of it. Yeah, Mitch. Yeah. No, it's like, I feel like shit and humiliated. And I'm like, I can't believe I, thought everyone would hate me if I was who I was in high school. And, I think we all have that, just that icky, like, ugh,
Yeah.
We
So
all,
I don't want to make,
we all have to be, how do they say it? Like, we all have to wear a mask to navigate through the human condition. I was very fortunate to be able to, when I was a little bit younger, to like travel and experience different cultures and people and the way they perceive it. But, ultimately what I tried to take from that is, it's like, we are all the same because we're cut from the same fabric, right? Like there's this giant blanket, and we'll just call it energy, and we're cut from it, and then we're put into these, I like to say mech suit because it makes me think of like Iron Man, and I think it's funny, but whatever you want to call it, this vessel. So we get stuffed in there, and then like we have this weird instrument that responds to like currents and chemicals, and we're just supposed to, there's no protocol.
Yeah, there's no manual.
Yeah, and people will be like, well, read the Bible or read this or go and experience. And I'm like, look, like wherever you find the answer within yourself through whatever, tools that assist you, great. But there isn't a protocol. It's just like, hey, man, like if you want the deep truth of it all, like you're kind of on your own. And I'm not saying that like you're not here for me or you're not here for me, right? Or that, my girlfriend who loves me very much isn't here for me, or my brother that I'm really like, my mom and dad care about me. Like that's not what it's about. It's that no matter how hard you try, it is impossible to show the version of yourself that to anyone else. That is the most intimate relationship that I think I will ever get to experience. And I think that's the same for both of you or anybody listening to this. The most intimate relationship you will ever have is with yourself. And, the joke is like, I was talking to my therapist and they basically said like, I needed to go take myself out on a date. And I was like, take myself out on a date. And they're like, go take care of yourself. Go and what's your favorite food? I love cheesecake. Okay, great. Go to the Cheesecake Factory. Go get yourself a steak or something and then treat yourself to some cheesecake, right? But make it about you. Don't take anyone with you. Don't let anyone else share your energy that night. It's you. And, I did this to myself a couple of times of like, I took myself out on a date and like, it is the most awkward thing at first because you're like, what am I doing here? Like, I'm just sitting and of course, now it's a little easy.
Who paid?
What's that?
Who paid?
Oh, well, obviously the waiter, right? Because like I'm not gonna, right?
It's funny you mentioned that because the funny story, on Friday there's a running group I belong to. Every Friday we run if you ever come to Stockholm, there's this beautiful island that's about 10 kilometers that we go around every Friday, and there's a beautiful cafe after, and there was a new person there that had just come from Brazil. And so like we're at the cafe after, and I'm like, I'm paying. She goes, no, I'm paying. No, I'm paying. And then finally the person serving us, she goes, I'm paying.
I've got this. Just get out of here, right? But you see my point, right? Of you have to be uncomfortable to grow, and I think that's a main component of that uncomfort is that we're afraid to fail, right?
Yeah.
Because like literally you go to school and it's like, hey, if you don't get this grade, people are gonna die. And you're like, people are gonna die? They're like, yeah, if you don't get an A+, if you don't get an A+, people are dead. Who's gonna die? People. It doesn't matter who they are. Do you want people to die? And you're like, oh my God. And
but that's kind of how they set it up in our society. Is it's this detrimental, and it's kind of what your grandpa went through too. Here's all of your future on this grade, or if you pass this.
And it's weird because I am kind of joking, but that's what they did, is they presented it to a way of like, do you want your parents to hate you for the rest of your life? And you're like, no. And they're like, great. If you fail the spelling test, we're going to exile you. We're going to drop you off in the forest, and you're either going to make it or you're not. Do you hear me? And you're like, I won't survive. And they're like, exactly. You better pass the spelling test. You're like in third grade, losing your mind because.
No, but it's a collective trauma, right? It has more to do with.
And we all have it. Like.
Maybe. I think some societies are different,
Sure. Yeah.
I think there's a kind of, it's interesting moving to Sweden. It's different. I mean, I can actually say that there's a different pace here. And American academics and people who work will come here and find it very hard to work because people aren't as anxious sometimes about success or progress or getting things done, or they're not willing to stay after a certain time at work. And it's not, we have our problems, and every country has their issues, but when it comes to, I think, that kind of anxiety. And I also, I like what you said about this kind of need to, we talk about narcissism, right? It just, when you say it, right, it's like everyone loves to call everybody else a narcissist. You're a narcissist, right? But all it means is really to look at, it's not all it means. There's a DSM diagnosis, of course, for narcissistic personality disorder. But what it means in terms of its etymology or its literal meaning is to, from narcissus, right, to this Greek character who looked at himself in the, and there's some great writing where in our lifespan, we have to look into ourselves. We have to go back into the mother, into the mother in real life gets deconstructed. She quote unquote dies, right? And now we have our own internalized other, this mother that we have to go into, as you're saying, and take ourselves out on a date. And the only thing I wanted to add to that is, well, what happens when we don't recognize ourselves?
Mm-hmm.
It's one thing to be in a conversation with someone else and be like, we have nothing to talk about, and that can be weird and awkward. But what's it like when we don't, that felt sense of who we are disappears, right? And that's a kind of failure that I think we're all on the edge of, right? That feeling, I'm sure you've been there, right? Where you don't feel well, maybe you something in your life, you're leaving a job or a friendship's going bad, and you're just like, you don't feel comfortable in your own skin sometimes, right? It's like in that sweet relief, right? The sweet relief when you kind of reemerge, or I don't know. I love that feeling when things kind of feel. I don't think I've ever told anybody this, not even my wife or anybody. I'm gonna no one in my life, but I know in my own body, it's almost like in the pit of my stomach. It's like if you could bottle joy, like if you could put joy in a bottle, or like ecstasy or something. I know you can put ecstasy in a bottle, but that's different. I always come back to this place when I know I'm in the right place, where this feeling comes back. It's as if like, oh, there you are, like my old friend. It's like I'm connected again. And when I haven't felt that for a while, or I'm adrift, it gets scary, right? It's like, where's that barometer of, and philosophically, there's lots of, I think, great traditions that really sort of just put it out there and say, this is what human beings have to do. They have to survive. Like my second last podcast is about Martin Buber. He's like, how do we survive disconnection? How do we survive the loss of the other? Which is, I think, the quintessential failure, or the person, not to take it there, but you said I can go as dark as I want. I'm not going to turn the lights off again. It's kind of goofy. But the literal lights going out, literally the lights going out, Can I tell a joke? A joke comes to mind. It's it's a Jewish joke, but I'll try and make it like, ecumenical or something. But this man is like on his deathbed, and he's like, he's in the room. It's like, it's close, it's minutes, hours, who knows, right? And all of a sudden he smells like the waft of like his favorite pastry coming from the kitchen. And he's saying to himself, "Oh my God, my wife loves me. Like, she's like, I am dying. I'm almost like, she still loves me. She's trying to bring me back to, she's like trying to wrestle my spirit." And so he like pulls himself out of the bed. He gets himself on the ground. He like, like climbs down the stairs. He almost dies getting down the stairs. He's gets to the kitchen. He grabs the door frame, yanks himself up. He sees these beautiful, they're called rugelach in Yiddish. They're these like little wrap pastries with like raspberry or chocolate or cinnamon, and and they're just like sweet and delicious. And he finally gets enough strength to get up there to reach for one. Maybe it might just give him a few more days. And he grabs it, and out of nowhere, his wife slaps his hand away, and she says, "They're for the funeral."
Oh God. Oh no. And he died immediately.
Oof.
That's a good one. Oh my God. Because I was like, what happens? Like once he gets to the tree, what happens? And dang, hey,
Failure.
there was
I can tell jokes in the podcast. That's okay. I haven't broken.
Oh yeah. No, we encourage it.
Yeah, we need more jokes. Which so if you have another, you can, but I did want to give you an opportunity that we give all of our guests, which is if you have maybe advice or something to ponder for our listeners, or another joke, this is that time. This is the time. It's the you time. You can share anything you would like.
I'll share a moment that I had last Wednesday coming home from work, and I was super tired, working long hours. It's got lots of balls in the air, lots of exciting stuff, but it's super demanding. Like, I don't want to, I'm at one of these like peak creativity moments where I'm just trying to keep it all together right now. And I was walking home, and I was feeling guilty that I hadn't seen my son all day, and I called my dad on the way home, and we chatted a bit. And I just came back from Canada, so I just had a chance to see him. And he's getting older, and every time we say goodbye and I come overseas, I don't know, right? Never know how his health is going to be, and like, we're on the phone, and he's reminding me of when I was a kid, and he would come back late from work, and sometimes 10, 11 p.m. And it's like his voice was like from some other world. Like, this may sound very provocative, but it was like almost like he'd already died. Like, he'd found some way, like he's already preparing himself in some way. Because when I'm with him, he's sharing. It's almost like he wants me to remember these things. Almost like some part of him knows that what he says to me matters every time we say goodbye. And I'm coming up the stairs to my apartment, and he's like, "Your son loves you. This is like, I did it. You're doing it. He's going to do it. Like, it's hard. You're working hard. He knows you love him. You don't need the guilt on top of already trying to survive everything else you're doing." He's like, "Let it go. You don't need it." And it was like my whole body, like, it just like this wave of, I don't know what came over me. Like, I even told my son the story at dinner, in front of him, sort of sharing that, like, almost mediating what my dad said, that he'll know, because I love my son. But it's just like the onslaught of trying to survive life. I think often there's a kind of meta fatigue or a meta guilt that we all feel, that given the current state of pop psychology or lists, or am I this, or am I that, or am I anxious, or am I extroverted, but I think what my dad was sharing was like, we don't need this extra layer of trying to figure out if we're doing it right or wrong, on top of what it actually means, as you pointed out, to survive, like you said, being in your mech suit, and just trying to figure that out and put that together in whatever way that we can survive it, that task is enough. And to be kinder to ourselves, if I'm going to give any advice, be kinder and just watch yourself when you take the bait. You take the bait from capitalism. You see that you're supposed to somehow keep going, or, that, no, that's not how things work. Things die all the time in nature, and so do we. And just because it's happening to you, it doesn't mean you failed. It means you're a human being. And we have to not drink the Kool-Aid that suggests, as you pointed out earlier, that we have to keep getting on this. But that's going to mean something different for everybody. And you can't just say it and make it go away. But I think that if I can share a bit of what my dad did, it was just this sweetness of, just slow down a bit. And we're all in this together. It may not always feel like that, but I think it's ultimately true. And I think you said that a few minutes ago. So.
And just telling you it's okay too, right?
I like the whole, like, giving the permission. Sometimes that's all we need, is that it's like that little nudge of, like, no, hey, for real, like, you do not have to feel guilty all the time. And sometimes, like, it doesn't feel like a choice. Like, you could be having the greatest day of your life, and then all of a sudden you're like, man, I'm pretty sad. No, I'm actually really, really sad. And it just kind of comes out of nowhere, and maybe you're not supposed to understand it. And until someone goes like, hey, like, here's the permission, like, you don't have to feel bad about this. You can observe it, kind of do what you got to do, and then move forward. But I love that you shared that with your son afterwards, right? Like, it was a direct, your dad gave it to you, and you immediately were like, yep, this needs to go down to my son. And, like,
Well,
I don't know how.
It was weird. I was a bit out of body because I found myself telling my son in front of my wife that my dad had told me to just not be that my son loves me, and to not feel guilty. And that's what I was sort of like, it was a bit, but something in me was like, no, this is important that I kind of share this a bit and just be open with him. And anyway, I have a podcast where I interview my son, which was a whole other cool experience. But anyway.
I need to listen to that one.
Yeah, I have to go, guys. I have a podcast to listen to.
That's very sweet.
So I really appreciate that. I think that was very genuine, and I think people are going to resonate with that. Maybe not the whole entire world, but there are people that probably needed to hear that. So I appreciate you sharing it. Megan, you already know what it is.
It's that time.
Yeah.
So
this is where, like, we just quickly list off, like, we got Facebook, we got Twitter, we got we just
doing it for me right now.
Yeah, we start saying stuff we don't have, like, we have LinkedIn, we haven't. Wait. You
got a satellite beaming it directly to the White House.
Oh, yep. We have a red phone that, like, you pick it up, we're there, right?
It's just playing.
Yeah.
But it never works because your podcast is about failure. It's like, why can't I hear anything?
That's the whole point.
Doesn't work. Doesn't work.
We haven't figured it out yet.
Doesn't work.
It's a good, like, PR thing. We should just install red phones in public places and have people figure it out for themselves. But like Sam said, you can find us on most socials at Friends of Failure. If you're listening to us on audio, you can also check us out on YouTube and see our faces. We do like to give the offer, just give us a rating or a review. We love feedback, good or bad. Let us know if we're failing on this failure podcast. We just want anything we can get from you guys to make it better for you. And then our favorite part, we do offer that you guys can send in your own failure stories. These can be deep and meaningful, or they can just be silly and stupid, whatever you want to do. And also, you're welcome to be anonymous or put your whole name and social security number to it. You can send those to friendsoffailurepodcast@gmail.com, or you can call our voicemail, Ethel, at 916-304-3345.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm like, okay, I know a couple of like antique places that I could go to and maybe find like rotary red phones.
Still thinking about it.
Yeah, I could just get some off of Amazon, probably paint them red.
I have a red antique phone downstairs.
Perfect.
There we go.
Perfect. Mitchell, I wanted to thank you again for joining us. I guess this evening for you, this afternoon for us. It was great. I genuinely enjoyed it a lot.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Definitely.
100%. And so with that being said, we'd like to leave everyone with this, and that is life is happening for you, not to you. So go out there and fail.
If it's not I'm stronger than you, it's I'm wiser than you, I'm more loving than you, I'm more tolerant than you, I'm more sophisticated than you. It doesn't matter what it is, but this constant competition is going on. This is the secret. This is the secret. You can't make a mistake.